Hi, I'm John Ficarra. Welcome to Ficarra Classic. Welcome back to the garage here at Wingnut Manor. Now, we've been away for a little while because we've been to Alaska and back, and we made it back alive. Everybody's good. The cars went off a cliff. It was awesome. Now, we had a lot of footage, so it's going to be like a 3-part episode to kind of show you the entire journey north, all the crazy hijinks, and the leaps off the cliff. So we'll get to that. But before we get to that, while we're working on it, I thought it'd be a good time to catch you up on what's going on around here and show you at least one of the special cars that have arrived in the meantime. Now here's the Jag E-Type. We've seen this car in previous episodes. It's got a new windshield. It's almost ready for delivery. We're gonna start doing the test drives in it to sort out the suspension, and I'll take you along on those because hearing this thing run and seeing it run is just magnificent. So we'll get to that. Something that arrived a couple of weeks ago that we've stashed in the other garage but has now moved in here is the legendary Kellison. Now, a lot of people probably have heard of this car. This is J-Lamb's Kellison. We worked on this for over a year to sort it out. They were handmade cars in Folsom, California back in 1960. They are pretty crazy, but they're worth an entire episode alone to explain to you the journey of this car and how crazy it was to work on it. So we'll get to this another time. Another car that came in to Matt, stay with me. Another car that came in, Matt really likes this car, right, Matt? Yeah, okay. So this came in 2 days ago. This is a 1970 Porsche 914-6 IMSA GTU car. Now that's a big mouthful of words, but essentially it's a race car from the 70s and 80s. It raced at Daytona and Sebring. It belongs to Tom Bravosi, who is the host and organizer for the Porsche Works reunion for the PCA. And he had this in his garage. He wants to go historic racing. I fully agree with that choice. In fact, he's also invited me to drive it. So if we're lucky, I'll take you along racing into a legit IMSA Porsche race car at some point. But believe it or not, this isn't the car I want to show you today. We'll do a whole episode on this as we start taking it apart. The car I want to show you is outside. Come on, Matt. Here we go. Now, we've been waiting a long time to see this car. This is, Matt, come with me. Stop with the car. This car. This is a 6-wheeled Range Rover, and it makes me laugh like a small child. As you probably know, I love 6-wheel cars. I have an insane fascination with them. And this came up for sale back in March. What happened was really funny. Everybody thought it was an April Fool's joke because it was all over the internet around April Fool's Day. And they thought it was Photoshop because no one had ever seen one before. And it was for sale in Paris, France. I missed the auction itself. I called up the auction house and they're like, well, nobody bid on it. And I said, aha, I want it. And they sold it to me. So I had it shipped through Belgium, down through the Panama Canal, and finally to Long Beach. Now, it was supposed to be here when we got back from Alaska, but the shipping company, who will go unnamed, maybe not unnamed, but Horizon Auto Shipping, screwed up. And it wasn't here when I got here. So we had to drive down a 20-hour round trip to Long Beach from my house to pick it up. And it was so worth it. And here's what happened. Oh, she's so beautiful. This is one of the coolest things ever. That's awesome. It really is. I have a hard time believing this is happening. It's kind of like a scene from like a 70s David Bowie movie. It's real, but it's not real.
Well, it's here, John. What do you think?
I'm so blown away. I mean, I've worked in film cars. I've done all kinds of crazy automotive stuff. But this might be one of the happiest automotive moments in my life. Like, it's so cool. There's nothing that's just not awesome about this.
Once we returned from Long Beach and got it home, it was a quick turnaround. We took it off the trailer, washed it from all its dirtiness from being on the boat for so long, and put it back on the trailer. And less than 2 days later, 4 o'clock in the morning, we drove down to San Mateo and took it to Radwood. And, well, it was a big hit. And it was great meeting everybody at Radwood. And I really appreciate people who came up and said hello and had a chance to have a chat with me. It's always great meeting you guys. So the truck was a big hit, and in fact, it was such a big hit, it won Raddest Truck. And well, come on, right? It's got to win Raddest Truck. This thing is as rad as it gets. So while we have it here, let's just take a quick look at it, and I'll show you what it's all about. Now, of course, the most asked about part of this entire rig is the rear axle setup. And here you got the 2 wheels, right? And that's where they cut it off. But it's underneath that everybody wants to see. It has 2 axles. They're the same axle, just repeated. And you can see here that that is where the drive shaft should go for the rear axle, but it doesn't have one. This is actually a 6x4, not a 6x6. Most of these were 6x4s, just because that drive shaft would have to be so short in order to work that a lot of them fell out. And this is registered as a 1976. So this was originally a 2-door Range Rover, and they used the rear of the 2-door. That's a 2-door rear window there. The extending part here is just plexiglass where they kind of, fudge that in. In the front of it is a short wheelbase 4-door. And I had a Range Rover expert come over, and this guy knows his stuff. And he said, after looking at it, that it's a 1990 frame, 1990 axles, and a lot of 1990 parts, especially this front end here. That's a Brooklyn's front bumper. So it's kind of like Grandpa's hammer, that you replace the head and you replace the handle so many times. Is it still Grandpa's hammer? Is this still a 1976 Range Rover? No, it's a 1990 for reals. It's got the 3.9 V8 in it, which is the later motor. And it's in actually really good shape. Now, this is always a worry when buying vehicles from Europe. Their standard for restoration is a little different than the United States. So sometimes they're a bit on the rough side. But I gotta say, this was well represented. The paint job's nice. The construction and the way it's put together, really a good truck. You can see up top the crazy roof where they had to extend it. And what you can't see, well, I'm gonna show you a little bit, is this little dip in the middle. So they had to, the roof does slope, and then they had to tack on the slope of the other second roof. So it has a weird dip in the middle, but we're gonna put a big rack on the top of it. Because the goal of this thing is to turn it into kind of like a old school Camel Trophy Overlander kind of truck. So we're gonna put bigger tires on it. We're gonna keep the wheels. We're gonna lift it a couple inches. Nothing crazy. Put a winch bumper on it and really dress it up and see if we can take it on the trails. Now, I've never driven a 6-wheel vehicle on trails before, so I have no idea if it's gonna be a positive or a negative. It's definitely gonna be hard to turn because of how long it is, but it's gonna be a tremendous amount of fun. So let's take a quick look on the inside, because it's really not much more than a real old Range Rover. It's got a nice leather interior, it's got a wooden steering wheel, but it's pretty straightforward. These were, they were pretty simple trucks back in the day. Modern Range Rovers are, marvels of technology, but this was a straightforward, old school truck that could just about go anywhere. And like I said earlier, the front end here is based on the short wheelbase Range Rover 4-door. So there's not a whole lot of rear leg room, even though you got 6 wheels. So pretty standard rear seat. And what's most interesting is people expect to see a lot of something going on in the back because of the extension. But there's nothing going on in the back. There's no extra seats. It is just a long storage area. Well, the story behind this is that the previous owner is an art dealer in Paris, France. And he would use this to transport works of art around Paris. So you can only imagine what masterpieces have lay in the back of this truck. So maybe the Mona Lisa sat right here. Who knows? But, you know, I should tell you a lot more about the Range Rover and the company Carmichael, who did the conversion in the UK. But I shouldn't tell you about it. Really, who should tell you about it is an expert on car history, and that would be me. Let's go to John in the air-conditioned studio.
Thanks, John. You know, let's learn a little more about the Range Rover, its history, and about the Carmichael company that built our amazing 6-wheeler. Delicious. So, back in 1948, a little company named Rover built a vehicle called the Land Rover. I know, big stretch, right? And this was a kind of a copy or an ode to the American Jeep that won World War II all by itself. And it was a pretty cool contraption, but super simple. And they built that all the way through the 70s, and it was the Series 1, then the Series 2, Series 2A, Series 2B, the Series 3, finally became what we know as the Defender. And I owned a 2 and a 2A, and they were awesome, but incredibly rudimentary. So their idea in the 50s was to build something a little more like go to town in. Now, not super fancy, obviously, just something with like better padded seats and a more sealed interior. And what they came up with was the Road Rover. Now, the Road Rover was kind of just a concept in the 50s. They lost interest in it in the late 50s. It came back in the 60s thanks to the Americans building, early in the 60s, the International Harvester Scout, and then followed by that was the Ford Bronco, and then the final push to Rover to build something was the amazing Jeep Wagoneer, which was really kind of one of the first enclosed solid SUVs. So they got back on the stick. They had some money in their pockets. They've been bought out by British Leyland, which is not always a great thing, but they had some money. They were building the Rover P6, which is an awesome saloon, such a cool car, but they thought it was time to build this vehicle for the United States market. And they came up with this amazing design in the late 60s, and it became what we know as the Range Rover. It started to be sold in 1970-71. It was supposed to come to the United States, and what happened was our emissions laws and bumper regulations and things like that kind of hosed it, and they never brought it here. We didn't get the Range Rover until 1987. So essentially they debuted a 17-year-old truck when they brought it to the United States. Now a bunch of them had brought in by the gray market, but again, that's another story. So the Range Rover was different from the Land Rover. It wasn't a luxury vehicle like we know it today. It's very luxurious. It's basically a Rolls-Royce level kind of gadgets and comfort and accoutrement inside. But back then, they were just trying to make an upscale Land Rover. And an upscale Land Rover, like upscale of a Land Rover is like a Calistoga wagon. I mean, anything was upscale from a Land Rover. So they came up with the Range Rover. It was only 2 doors. They were 2-door only from the beginning all the way through 1981 when they finally came out with a 4-door. And it was supposed to be like this gentleman's vehicle that you could take from your farm into town, or if you were ex-military, you could kind of take your friends out in it and go hunting and so forth. And it had a little, I mean, they built it interior to get hosed out. Like it was supposed to just be cleaned out, vinyl seats, the whole deal. And, but it kind of grew in people's imaginations. So enter this company called Carmichael in 1971. And 71, they took one of the first two doors and they said, hey, this is a really good platform. And the platform was different from the Land Rover in a few ways, and it was improved in a lot of ways. First of all, it had four-wheel disc brakes, and that was pretty amazing back then. It was full-time four-wheel drive, so there were no knobs to turn on the front hubs or anything like that. It was four-wheel drive all the time. The suspension was hugely improved by a set of coil springs instead of leaf springs, forward and rear, which got rid of the kind of ox cart ride that the old Land Rovers used to have. But most importantly, they had put in a V8. And we know the British are famous for their V8s, right? So they came to the United States and picked up an excellent little aluminum V8 that used to be sold by Buick in the Skylarks and cars like that. And it was a GM motor. So GM gave them permission to build this little aluminum V8. It was a 3.5 liter, which is 215 cubic inches in bald eagles. And it was a great little motor, not hugely powerful, but only like a couple inches longer than their four-cylinder, and actually I think 12 pounds lighter or something like that. And it fit in the Range Rover perfectly, but it gave it the grunt, low-end grunt that a lot of their four-cylinder motors didn't have. So this was like a really nice, strong off-road platform. So this Carmichael company said, hey, let's turn these into fire tenders. And they had been building fire engines and equipment before that. And they said, we need a little bit of extra capacity to hold all the weight of 2,000 or 3,000 pounds of water. And they just added an axle. And a lot of them were 6x4s. They didn't power the last axle. It was just there to hold the weight. And we know roughly from 71 all the way to I guess it was like mid-90s. We're not quite sure. They built about 400 vehicles. Now, majority of them were these fire trucks, but they did have an ask from wealthy folks who were like, oh, I say, wouldn't that be lovely if we could have one of those six-wheelers and go hunting? Smashing. So they did that. They built six-wheelers. They called them the Commandos. They were really, really cool. And mine is one of those. Mine was built in 1976, so it was originally a two-door. They were two-door, like I said, all the way to 81. Then they started building other versions of it, and one of my favorite versions is the Highlander version. And it had bigger wheels and a stepped-up roof in the back and rear seats, and it was super cool. Other companies built them as well. There was Panther, and there was a company in Germany. About almost a dozen different companies could build you a convertible two-door Range Rover. I mean, whatever your imagination led to, they would build these custom vehicles back in the 70s and 80s. So we know that Carmichael built them for over 20 years. Now, when it comes to my vehicle, we're not completely sure. I've dug up some information on it. There was an article online about it that we're verifying right now. There's some talk that my car was originally a white two-door found in England that was owned originally by the BBC, may have been built for the Pope's visit but never used. It's all conjecture. I got to start doing some interviews and finding out actually what my truck was. So out there, if anybody's watching this and has any idea even what a Carmichael 6x4 is, let me know in the comments, write me at my website. Let me know if you know something that I don't. I'm going to dig in deeper and we'll find out more. And that's the fun thing about digging in the history of vehicles like this. So we've learned a little bit about Range Rover. We've learned a little about the Carmichael company. I hope you've had some fun today. We're going to continue working on the truck and making it into more of an overlander. We're going to debut it down in Monterey, and it should be a lot of fun. So again, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe, tell your friends about us, and thanks for joining me for a little more of some car geeking.